It's okay to design messy at first, but at a certain point, you're going to just have to clean up your design document. Just as long as you're cleaning up as it makes sense for you. Maybe you clean up your files before a design review. Maybe you tidy things up before you share your files with another designer. Either way, there's not really a right or wrong methodology for design document organization. Most of the time, people are gonna figure out their own methodology of what makes sense. But I wanna cover the 3 main design document organization file types that I like to use in my project, starting with the simplest. The first being a single file document. Now, if your project is on the small side in terms of features and or team members, then you can absolutely keep everything inside of one document. Let me show you something I've been working on recently for this Contrast 2.0 app. The team is small. It's just me and my friend Sam, who is the developer on this app. I started off during the WWDC 2020 keynote. They announced Big Sur, the new OS for Mac, and I just kind of pulled some screenshots off of the Apple website, and I was just really kind of wanted to see how I could make Contrast look more like the new OS. And you can see there's these big rounded corners and kind of like a nice breathable type of design. So I just started off with this document called Big Sur inside of the Contrast thing, and I'm just literally throwing things around everywhere. I didn't hardly name anything. I mean, there's a few names here and there, but it's just overall really messy. So this is what the app currently looks like. And these are some possible designs where it's like, okay, should I go slightly updated? Maybe I'll throw in some transparency, but really just throwing things around, just exploring things pretty much everywhere. And then maybe that goes into something a little bit cleaner that's still, I'm not worried about organizing this because this is really just for me. I don't really need to share this with anybody just yet. I'm just running a bunch of tests on how to lay all of this out, what colors are going to work, what if somebody chooses failing colors, how am I going to handle that and still be able to see the UI. Lots of different little tests on all of this stuff. I was really playing with different variations of failing colors, AA, large, etc., etc. You got some more tests over here, just lots and lots of stuff everywhere. Just really messy. I will often start most of my projects with 1, 2, 3, multiple messy files that are just for me. I mean, I can screenshot things, I can share the occasional little thing out of it, but I'm not worried about organizing it because this is really just for me. It's almost like my playground, you know, there's not any rules. I can throw things around. It's just whatever makes sense for me. I can duplicate things all the way across the artboard and it'll be totally fine. And then I created a new document that's a little less chaotic and I pulled my favorites out of these two. Got all these here, and then I'm trying to pull some that I can share that's a little bit tidier, just a simple artboard. Okay, maybe we have these and there's a preference for the full color one. And then I started on my actual design document, the one that you're probably most interested in terms of learning about the single file system. So once I've gotten all those explorations out of the way, I do start organizing things a little bit more nicely. But you can see here, I have the exploration page is still here. I still, even from the messy files, this file started off messy. And I'm playing around with a bunch of different colors, copied and pasted a bunch of different things, playing with some different switch styles and sliders. I'm trying to figure out lots of things. I'm still exploring lots of different options. And so, but now that this needs to be my tidy file that I'm eventually going to share with Sam, the developer, I want it to be clear that this is just a bunch of exploration. So I will often create just an exploration section. Then I'm going to start slowly, very slowly. You can notice that I'm not too worried about components on each one of these. Some of these have components. I have tried to make use of components and instances, but I'm really not that worried about that right now. When it makes sense, these input fields are going to be the same. So I know that I can go ahead and create one component and just use that. Still trying to figure out the position of some of this stuff. So these, I ended up breaking them up and there's not really any components associated with this. So I can change any of that and it's not really a problem. But again, this is on the exploration page. Once I finally started to kind of land on something that I really like, which was this idea of using these bars on top, you can see that a lot of this stuff is still messed up because I was using some components and some I wasn't. But anyway, I wanted to use this bar on top with a color, and I started thinking, man, I really like the way this is turning out. So now I'm ready to start getting a little more tidy. So now I start making these components. And what I did was I will grab whatever I want to build from the messy exploration page, and then I'll go into a new page, and then I'm just kind of slowly and methodically trying to figure out, okay, maybe the frame on this background is that big, and I'll create a component that has a certain amount of pixels. Maybe it's 8 there, 8 there. And I'm really just trying to very slowly, very methodically going through and piecemealing all the little components out. And so at this point, I will go in and I'll create all the tiny little pieces. So you can see if I start changing this root score here, you can see all of those are starting to update. But this is really just like a slow and methodical process. And I will create, okay, now I have the score and I have the hex input and the ratio. Well, now I can combine all of those along with this little icon, and I can build in, okay, I've got 8 pixels of padding on top and bottom, 12 on the sides, 4 in between all of the elements. And so now I can use this thing, an instance. So if I wanted to change the size of the score, I could do that and it would affect all the other instances. Now, this doesn't really have that much to do with design document organization, but I do like having a components page once I'm ready to kind of systematize things. And I can create these individual instances of whether it's, I mean, this is a small app, so it's a lot easier for me to make a little system out of all of the app. But you could definitely create components on the actual page if you wanted to. If you wanted to have different pages with components off to the side, that's totally fine too. Whatever makes sense for your project. And then once I have all these components, I'm copying instances of these apps. And now this is just one instance of that app. And so you can see if I go to that master component, okay, now I'm here and now I can look at all the little components inside of that one. And it just kind of starts to create a little bit easier of a system. So now I can try it out on different backgrounds. I can select the instances and try out different colors and just to see how that works. So it just kind of, if you create those multi-nested components and then you have your screens built with that, it'll slowly start to give you the idea of how the design system is going to kind of come together. Because most of the time you never really just start off making a design system. Usually it's going to be through a bunch of exploration, through a lot of trial and error, and just a bunch of looping back through the work, making a component, making a change, making a component, making a change, just over and over, just kind of a messy process. There's never just an easy way to just spit out a design system. But having the organization of the components and then some of the UI in slightly different pages can be really helpful. Again, this is a small app, so not everything is going to be like this. Not all of your projects are going to be like this. Last page on here, I've got a prototype. So a lot of these prototypes are actually, I had to break them up because you can't always animate that easily between fixed components. So some of this I had to break up and create little masks so I could hide and show things. So if we look at the prototype view, you can see how I'm masking these little controls right here, and they're kind of high, they're going up and down in between a mask, and that's not part of the component. I had to create that specifically for the component. I've got these scores, AAA, AA, and fail. They're all in a text group, and I'm just moving them behind a mask to create that. But that's not part of the component. It's just part of the prototype. And I created that separately. I always create a prototype completely separate of the design components because often you have to tweak them and rip them apart and kind of mess them up in order to animate them how you want to animate them. So most of the time, I will definitely create a separate prototype screen. And if I wanted to create a different prototype, I might even create, I might duplicate this and create, another prototype that might toggle something else. So it's just a matter of what makes sense for your project. For this one, it's really small. The team is small, the features are small, so everything's inside the same project. Okay, here's an example of the My Monero desktop app. And you can see here, single file, and everything has numbers associated with the feature. So everything 0, 1, first time user experience, could also be onboarding. But really, this is all the first time you're ever logging into the app. So this one is showing using an existing wallet. So we click this button. log into your wallet, and you're just kind of step by step showing each one of those screens all the way until we have that actual design. And once they enter their PIN, they will be in the wallet view. But now we want to show also what does it look like when we create a new wallet? And again, just kind of step by step. This screen's next, this screen's next, this screen's next. Everything is basically laid out feature by feature. So this is both onboarding. This one's logging in, this one's creating a new one, and then these are all the wallet detail screens. And notice that I'm actually using a number for each one of those. And that's really so that when I export these designs, since I've numbered these artboard names, everything is going to line up just the same way I want it to. If I were to do first time UX and not have the number, then all of these abstract states would actually appear first because A comes before F in the alphabet. So A files would show up before the F file. So in order to kind of force these to get organized how I want, a lot of times I'll just use a simple numbering system, and you don't have to follow any specific numbering system, just something that makes sense. After I was done designing all this, I made this little about modal, and I had already numbered every single feature. So I was like, well, I could go in and rename every layer by and changing the number, or I could just stick this up here as 00 because it's not really a feature anyway. And this is just one of those examples where I just changed the number for this just to make it first, just to have it in there. Could have put it last, but I put it first. It doesn't really matter. As long as it makes sense to you and it makes sense for how you would be walking through your design files when you present it. Oftentimes that is how I will organize it based on how I know that I'm going to either hand it off to a developer or I'm going to walk through it for a design review. I will get it organized like this. Maybe, you don't necessarily need numbered features and have everything so exquisitely organized when you're doing the first video review. But if you're exporting the files and you're sending them off somewhere, it always helps to have it a little bit more organized like this. And the single file structure is probably my favorite. I will always start off with this type of file structure. And I also really like to have everything on the same screen. You can see I don't have a lot of pages up here, but I do have a wallet detail exploration. So on this screen right here, we have our wallet detail, and I'm using blue for all of these colors, but I also wanted to kind of explore what all the different colors would look like and make sure that those were nice looking colors and they would work. So rather than have all of these duplicate files on the main page, I just created a separate page for that. Again, this is just something that made sense for this project. It's not that I would do this every single time. Maybe for another app, it would make sense to have all those colors laid out here, but you can really just do this however you want. And right here, this UI graveyard, this is probably similar to my exploration page in that Contrast 2.0 Figma file. But this is just these are older designs where I wasn't quite sure with how I was going to lay this wallet stuff out. So I'm just exploring different options, different colors, but I wanted to keep this stuff because inevitably when you go through in a design review, someone might ask me, well, did you consider putting the address in with the number of Monero that you have in your wallet? And I could say, well, actually, I did try that. I tried it right here and it just didn't feel like that went as well. And we have all these other things listed down below. So it felt like it made sense to be in a separate module because people copy it enough to where it should be its own thing. And when you can reference something like this, it's really powerful in a design review because then you are basically agreeing with the person who questioned your design, and you can say, yes, actually, I did think of that. Here's what that looks like. And here's the rationale for going forward with this other design. Most of the time, you will be able to disperse those design objections by showing that you were able to already think of that, already try a few options, and then have a reason for moving forward in a different direction. All right, so now we're going to get into the single file with multiple pages. Now, we kind of danced around that in the first version with our single file, but we were just using pages loosely for whatever we needed. But in this example, this was such a big project that it had all these different features where you're onboarding, you're signing up, you have My Trips, you have search forms, confirmation forms, hotels, itineraries, flight legs, hotel legs, lots of different things in here. We've got a little bit of kind of like wireframes mixed in with UI design, but you could tell this would get pretty overwhelming very quickly. So rather than list out all of the numbered features on one artboard. I'm simply using that exact same method and I'm listing out all of the features in the pages inside the document. So it's really the exact same idea where you're breaking everything up into features and using a number to kind of indicate, okay, on screen 10, section 10, screen 1, section 10, screen 2. You can use a numbering system like that to make the screens more identifiable when you get ready to talk about them in design reviews and with other people on your team. When necessary, I will organize features by pages like this, although I do prefer to kind of have everything on one screen. This is kind of like, I'll do this if I need to. But don't let what I prefer change what you prefer. You might actually prefer to have everything on separate pages, and you like that method better than having everything listed out in a bunch of rows. Sometimes that can be a little bit more organized. So do what makes sense for you and your project and the team that you're working with. All right, so now I'm going to take you into a deep dive into this My Monero folder structure. So I've got the My Monero project. I've got my projects here, the desktop app, we've got our design, and we've been looking at these sketch files. I've got all of my UI. You can see everything's listed out like this. But I actually did all the wireframes for this app in Adobe Illustrator. And Adobe Illustrator it did not like that many files. Adobe Illustrator did not like that many designs in one single document. It just started getting really sluggish, really overwhelmed with the sheer amount of vectors that we had in the design. So you can see here you can see in the review folder, we actually have the master PDF of all the wireframes. I've got my content map, I've got my first time user experience, we've got our wallets, and we've got sending and requesting, contacts, kind of like the flow of what's happening. So kind of like user flows, but more low fidelity design. You can pretty much tell like I was already thinking really intentional about the layout. But again, Illustrator just did not like this and it was getting a little bit too bogged down. So I ended up breaking all of these features into different files. But you'll notice I'm still using the exact same numbering system. Number 1, content map. Number 2, first time user experience. Number 3, wallets. Number 4, number 5, so on and so forth. So in my UI document, I might have 2 different numbering systems for logging in and creating a new account. But at this level, it's slightly different. And that could be a problem if it were a bigger organization and you were looking for feature flow number 3. You might want to keep it a little bit more consistent. But for this was a small team and I could just do what worked for me. This is the example of just breaking everything up into multiple files. So lastly, I'll show you the exact same thing that I did for the SmartLine project. I've shown some of those designs before, but we have our design document here. We have Framer, which is what we created most of these designs in. And you can see I broke this up into iOS and Android because they were slightly different. And then I also had a bunch of keynotes that I had to create for design review, design presentation. These were the Framer files, prototype files that I actually created specifically for the presentation. But here, same thing, we have single app with multiple files. We've got onboarding, sign in, navigation, conversations, dialer, contacts, count. But it's the same exact principle. We're numbering these features and that's just allowing us to have an easy conversation. It allows me to really easily organize my documents. And it just, even though you might have the same components across documents, this allows just an easy way to navigate through everything and to quickly send someone a file, send someone an asset. As it gets bigger, as the team gets a lot more complex, as this one was, it makes sense to break things up a little bit more. But whether you're using a single file with pages or multiple files, I typically always just have a row of the featured flow. Sign in. Here's every screen that is associated with sign in and just list it all out together. Whether it's on a page, on an artboard, or in its own document, that's what makes the most sense for me. And that's how I've just been doing this for years and years in the same exact way. And just I've gone really technical with screen number 2.02.01 and I tried to get really, really granular and technical, and it almost became more about the organizational aspect of it than it was about actually designing a nice project. So I encourage you to just do just enough that makes sense so you don't go too overboard. So if the team you're working with has a best practice, maybe you should adhere to that. But if you find something that really works for you, maybe you can pitch a new practice and show whoever you're working with how that could work better for your project. So a couple of quick pro tips for renaming things to create this type of organization. In Figma, one of the things that I absolutely love, you might already know this, you can click any artboard name or any layer name and hit Command R to rename the layer just right in place. You can even do this when the menus are not visible. You can click here, Command R, and rename the layer. Even though you can't see it, hit return and it'll still rename it for you. But one really cool thing that I love about Figma is that you can select all of these artboards. If I have multiple frames selected and hit Command R, I get now a little rename modal that pops up. And I can say, actually, I want to just add a 0 before each one of these. And I don't need to go in and manually do each one. I can just type 0, hit current name. That's a little variable for current name. It'll even show you a preview of what that looks like. Maybe I want to do 0 dash and then that name. Really anything, I could even say, UI design, and that might be it. And so now I have UI design 1 star, UI design, but then maybe I change my mind. Like, no, I don't need UI design on there. I'm going to actually look for UI design and replace that with 0. Maybe I want to get rid of the space and the hyphen and the next space, and then I want to do that. So it's just a really nice way to quickly rename artboards once you get ready to make that organization a part of your process, once you get ready to hand off those files or share them with someone on your team. Inside of Sketch, you can definitely still rename something by hitting Command R and rename it. But if you select multiple artboards in Sketch, at least with the current version, and hit Command R, nothing is going to happen. But there is a really cool plugin called Rename It. So if you search for Rename It and install it, I can rename these selected artboards. So if I want to do UI design and space hyphen space and then the current layer name right there, then I can do that, and you can see it's going to pop those in. So that's a really handy plugin for Sketch. I'm not aware of any plugins for XD, but there's always new things being released. So I would encourage you to search for some kind of renaming plugin if you're using Sketch or XD. Figma is, it's built right in, so it works great. But those are just a couple of pro tips for helping you organize that and rename those artboards when you get ready to do it. So no design homework specifically for this lesson. Mostly I just want you to be aware of the way that I approach my organization process. It's okay to start off messy. It's okay to have 3 files that are completely nonsense and garbage. They're not named. The layers are all over the place. That's totally fine. Then you can take it into a slightly more organized file, and you can use the numbering system. Maybe you have a couple of different explorations. Use the version numbering system that we covered back in the organizing design file lesson. You can use the single page version, the single page with multiple pages, or you can use the multiple file version. But either way, all 3 of those follow that same basic principle of just designing a bunch of features and keeping those features separated and grouped together. And if you need to do a prototype, that could be a separate file as well. It doesn't have to be embedded in a page. Sometimes that could be a separate file. Maybe that makes more sense. So the most important thing to remember is just do what makes sense for your project. So next time you start a project, try and follow some of these tips.